Want to know the latest in soccer? Then listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast. From MLS, the World Cup, and the Premier League, we've got you covered. The latest updates, the hottest matches, and news on the league's top players. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast.
David Beckham scores the goal to take England all the way to the World Cup finals.
Listen now.
Thank you for tuning into the GSMC Soccer Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Paul Hutchinson, and I'm delighted you found us, and I hope that you'll find the next hour or so entertaining and informative about the world of football. I'm new around here, so just a quick thing about who the heck I am. My name is Paul Hutchinson, as I said. I'm originally from a place called Bolton, which is just outside Manchester, England, northwest of England. Therefore, it is my cross to bear that I am a Bolton Wanderers fan, who are so far removed from the top echelons of football these days that I get to view this sport from a pretty neutral perspective. I'm also an England fan when it comes to internationals. I've been a football fan ever since I was bought my first ever replica jersey in 1986, the England jersey when England were playing in the World Cup in Mexico. So since then, I just love the thing, and I've been a season ticket holder at my club, Bolton Wanderers, during the glory years of when Sam Allardyce had them in the Premier League, and we were a force. But I've since moved to San Diego. I've been here now for about 10 years. I'm heavily involved in the soccer community in that city. I watch my games with Arsenal fans, Manchester City fans, Villa, Wolves, and Leicester City fans, who all get up at ridiculous times of the day to follow their teams. I love chatting to people who've been following the game for ages and new fans alike. So I am absolutely delighted that I'm been able to be given this opportunity to share my love of this sport. So with that, I'll let you know what we're going to be covering today. The first two segments are going to be how the different leagues around the world are approaching the response to COVID-19. Are they starting their leagues back up again? What provisions are being put in place for that? Have they called their league? What are people doing? And in the next two sections after that, we'll focus on US soccer, mainly the US women's national team's decision to appeal the ruling given on equal pay, and MLS's plans to get the season up and running again. And in part three, the transfer market. We'll see the rumours that are going around for where different players are going to end up. And then finally, in part four, the start of hopefully a series that I want to continue to run, which I'm calling Around the World in 80 Soccer Moments. And this week, one very significant one for the US, when Diana Ross missed a penalty at Soldier Field and all of the fallout from all of that. And the day the football rules were codified. So I think that's plenty to be getting on with. I'd love for you to get involved, and the best way to do that is via our social media outlets. We are at GSMC_soccer on Twitter and Instagram. And so anything that you would like to comment on that's raised in this podcast today, really love to hear from you. All right, let's get going on the first part of the podcast, which is all about coronavirus. But before we get going into that, I just want to lay some sort of ground rules. The way I've been brought up, there's a few things that I might say that may jar slightly, and I just want to get ahead of that, first of all. So, I'm amongst friends here. If you're listening to a soccer podcast, I assume that you also know that in Europe, it is referred to as football. So, on this podcast, soccer football, footy, they're all interchangeable. And so, to avoid confusion, if I was ever to refer to American football, I would be referring to the NFL in that case. In terms of like grammar, I will say that Manchester United are leading in a game, and I wouldn't say that Manchester United is leading. So again, just a little bit of a grammar thing, and I may very well drop the odd idiom. So it might very well be a good idea to have maybe Urban Dictionary or something open whilst you're listening to it. But I think that's part of the fun. I've known football for quite a bit, and so I do tend to like to use the odd idiom. With all of that said, let's have a dig into what the coronavirus has done to the leagues around the world. So, as you may or may not be aware, the Bundesliga are intending to get back to it on May 16th, which is next weekend. This is going to be a real test, I think, for what will happen around the rest of Europe, whose leagues have not already called it. They will be the first European league to restart. So, hopefully, in the podcast that will be coming out on Thursday, I might get to actually preview some games, which will be a wonderful relief. We've not had the opportunity to do that for a good long while. So, yeah, the first game is going to be Schalke versus Borussia Dortmund, which is going to be an absolutely massive game. And we'll get into all of that more next time round. There are very strict health protocols. That won't come as a surprise, I don't think. Fans will be banned from the stadiums, but they will be playing in everyone's home ground. There won't be any neutral grounds, which is the proposed thing that will happen in other countries. We'll get into that a little bit when we talk about the Premier League in a little moment. The Germans have been training since kind of mid-April. So there's no clarification on the issues of matches being free to air in Germany. But I believe that broadcasters are kind of having talks about doing that. I think to appease the idea of not being able to see your teams actually in the stadium. What can you do to prevent large groups from turning up outside? I think there's got to be some sort of common sense approach to that. It's not like in the US where everyone's games are beamed live through some network or other. It doesn't necessarily follow that. Just a certain few that will be selected to be played in times where broadcasters are allowed to broadcast live games. But even so, there's still been some positive results. I think players in the top two divisions have been tested, and I think Cologne had 3 players that tested positive just recently. So I think that's very much going to be monitored to see whether or not this is a viable option. And I'm sure the Premier League in particular are looking very intently on how it's all organised, because they are very much trying to get their season back up and running. And I think if the Premier League decides to call it, then it's just not going to happen at all. There are I think 6 teams now that have opposed plans to play in neutral grounds, which is the preferred way that the Premier League want to do this. Again, in an effort to prevent fans from just showing up and hanging out outside the grounds, they are trying to move it so that no one has an advantage, or that everyone can be in the same kind of area, using the same kind of people, cameramen, all the sort of background staff, rather than having each ground have their own people involved, therefore more numbers of people. So I think they're trying to get that down to an absolute minimum. I know that the Watford boss has been particularly adamant about not playing in neutral grounds. Watford are around and about the relegation zone, and so they see having home advantage against some of the top clubs as well something that they will maybe have had to rely on in order to stay in the division. And he used words such as sporting integrity as well. So I think that those sorts of teams around the relegation zone are going to need reassurance that if these games are played, that they won't be relegated on the strength of them. I think that's the only way that neutral grounds will be allowed to happen. I feel like this is an exercise in just making sure that Liverpool get the title. They have been by a million miles the best team this year, by 20 odd points. They are top at this point. It's only the relegation places that still need to be sorted out. And I don't know if these are the circumstances in which you can relegate teams. So we'll see how all of that goes. Crackpot is the right word or not, but someone has mentioned in Western Australia that there's a plan that they could play the games in Western Australia. But again, can you imagine players being uprooted, families being left alone for a few months while they play these games? And obviously Western Australia is a very remote place. I just feel that would be such a wrench for everybody to go all the way over there and in such a stressful time ask professional people to put themselves through that. What we'll do is we'll take a little break there, and when we come back, we'll talk a little bit more about the ways that Serie A and La Liga going about things. You're listening to the GSMC Soccer Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network.
You really can't underestimate the importance of having the right creative work for your brand or your product. Whether it's a logo, a website, a book cover, or an ad campaign, you really need a quality design to make that big difference pop and deliver your overall engagement and success in a competitive market. That's where Design Crowd comes in. Design Crowd has over 750,000 designers from Sydney to San Francisco ready to help you with awesome creative ideas. They make crowdsourcing work for you. So if you need a logo or you're working on your creative branding, you can go to designcrowd.com and post a brief describing the design you need. And then within about 2 to 7 days, you'll receive up to over 100 different designs from designers around the world. Then you pick the best design and approve payment to the designer. So you're only paying for the design that you want. It takes a lot of the guesswork out of freelancing and out of crowdsourcing. And you don't have to be a huge company like Harvard Business School to use Design Crowd, although they have used it as well. You can start a project on Design Crowd for as little as $99. And if you go right now to designcrowd.com/health and wellness or enter the promo code health and wellness on their website, then our health and wellness listeners will receive up to $150 off of your design project. That's designcrowd.com/health and wellness or entering that promo code health and wellness.
Are you looking to get your college football fix? Looking to get the latest news on your favorite school's team? The GSMC College Football Podcast is your ticket to all things college football. Join us as we talk college football from the national championship, the college rivalries, the bowl game, to the Heisman Trophy. To which conference is the best? We've got you covered for the Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, the Pac-12, ACC, and everything in between. Download the GSMC College Football Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Section previous, we were talking about how the Bundesliga are looking to get going with the resumption of their league and how the Premier League are coming a little bit unstuck about what they plan to do regarding coronavirus. So, in the other major leagues around Europe, La Liga, they've started testing and training. It's only been about a week since the country itself has been allowed to go outside, even to exercise around the block. So they are apparently returning to individual training, or have done already. Lionel Messi and Barcelona are working on their own right now at their facility. They are starting testing players for coronavirus as part of the protocols. This is all in an effort really to get the resumption of their league going. They have 11 games left to play. I think that the testing is very stringent. They have to be tested 2 days before they can start these individual sessions, and then be involved with the collective training sessions. They're going to be tested daily once those training sessions start. And if there is a positive test, that means that they will have to isolate, and all of those people that they've been in contact with will also have to isolate. So this is very much on a bit of a knife edge, all of this, isn't it, really? And I think this is the case as well in the Premier League, that they have to turn up in their own training kit. So they have to do their own washing of that, and there won't be any meals be prepared. There's only going to be a maximum of 6 players on a pitch at any given moment, and they have to be responsible for their kit to make sure that it gets washed, and it won't be it won't be the responsibility of the club. The final goal is obviously collective training sessions. This is the final phase of it all, but the provisions on the cleaning of the facility and equipment will also remain throughout that. I know that in the Premier League as well, that they will be required to wear masks throughout the training sessions, which I don't know about you, but when I go to Trader Joe's and I'm wearing a mask, I kind of get anxious and out of breath. So what it would be like to be running around as a professional athlete, I don't quite know. Anyway, that's what's going on in La Liga. Serie A are also looking, if they can, to start again. There were some plans put forward that everyone would come to Rome and use the 2 stadium in Rome that are the homes of Roma and Lazio, and then use training facilities around the city, that everyone will be based there. However, there was a little bit of a spanner thrown in the works with 3 Fiorentina players and 3 members of the actual support unit there tested positive coronavirus. So Serie A are still waiting for the Italian government to give them permission to start training, although players are already training individually at home and in facilities around the country. There has been no decision as yet as to when the league will resume in Italy. So, all very much up in the air. One of the other things as well will be the playing conditions. Another some owners of clubs have issues with is the idea of just having these playing conditions be so radically changed around. And one of them is to use a maximum of 5 substitutes in order to prevent disruptions happening too often in the game. That each team will be allowed 3 opportunities to make substitutions during the game, and substitutions can be made at half time. If both teams make a substitution at the same time, this will count as one of their 3 opportunities. So it's trying to prevent the idea of, at the end of games, sometimes managers will throw on a sub just to kind of disrupt rhythm, waste a little bit of time. So it's an effort to hopefully stop that from happening. I have heard ideas that they should be allowed 10 substitutions. And the idea being that even if you do have 5 subs, that means there's going to be 5 players who, having not played for 2 and a bit months are then being asked to play for an entire full game. That's also a really big ask. So what will, I think, be obvious is that when football does come back, it will be very different from the final games that we had been watching before all of this kicked off. So what do I think? What is the ultimate plan here? I like to think about Frank Lampard's comments, I have to say. He was interviewed, and I think this is what it's going to come down to eventually. That if at the moment frontline workers aren't getting the testing that they need, to then have all of this testing aimed at footballers, high earners and all that kind of thing, that regardless of what you think about all of that, it just doesn't seem quite right that all of this effort is going into making sure that 9 games get played. And so I think unless that changes and there is so much testing about that it doesn't matter, I can't see this getting off the ground even a little bit at all. I'm sure Premier League are going to have their eye on what happens in the Bundesliga and how their organisation happens, the upkeep of the testing in the Bundesliga. This is so important for any decision, I think, to be made. But however, what I am going to finish this little section on is a little bit of upbeat news. That it's been quite fascinating to see how players have responded to being locked down, some more positive than others. Maybe I shouldn't urge you to have a look at what Kyle Walker's been up to, but on a more positive note, Premier League Invitational has been organised. It's been really, I'm not really into my esports particularly, but it was quite engaging really, that it was obvious that these young England players from all around the country knew each other really well and had probably played each other before now, and so there was sort of rivalries going on around and about. And it was actually James Maddison, who plays for Leicester. He triumphed in the Premier League, and he had a last gasp equaliser against Keenan Davis of Aston Villa, and then went on to actually win it as well. So those have been quite fun to just be involved in. It's definitely seeing players in a really fun light as well. Well done on the Premier League for organising that sort of thing. All right. If you've got any comments about what you think should happen regarding all the different leagues around the world, let us know. GSMC_soccer on Twitter and Instagram for any of the comments that you want to put forward. When we come back, we'll have a look at the US soccer scene, focus on the US women's national team and how the MLS is looking. You're listening to the GSMC Soccer Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network.
You really can't underestimate the importance of having the right creative work for your brand or your product. Whether it's a logo, a website, a book cover, or an ad campaign, you really need a quality design to make that big difference pop and deliver your overall engagement and success in a competitive market. That's where Design Crowd comes in. Design Crowd has over 750,000 designers from Sydney to San Francisco ready to help you with awesome creative ideas. They make crowdsourcing work for you. So if you need a logo or you're working on your creative branding, you can go to designcrowd.com and post a brief describing the design you need. And then within about 2 to 7 days, you'll receive up to over 100 different designs from designers around the world. Then you pick the best design and approve payment to the designer. So you're only paying for the design that you want. It takes a lot of the guesswork out of freelancing and out of crowdsourcing. And you don't have to be a huge company like Harvard Business School to use Design Crowd, although they have used it as well. You can start a project on Design Crowd for as little as $99. And if you go right now to designcrowd.com/health and wellness or enter the promo code health and wellness on their website, then our health and wellness listeners will receive up to $150 off of your design project. That's designcrowd.com/health and wellness or entering that promo code health and wellness.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Alright, welcome back to the GSMC Soccer Podcast. I'm Paul Hutchinson. In the first part we looked at how all of the different leagues around the world are coping with COVID-19. And what I'd like to move on to now is how the US have been coping and what news has been happening in US soccer. Probably the big news, the US women's national team had their bid for equal pay dismissed by a judge about a week ago, I believe that was, and in response to that, the sort of breaking news, or the most recent news, is that they have filed an appeal against that decision. So last week, the judge just dismissed their claims being underpaid compared to the men's team. So it was they were actually looking for damages around the sort of $66 million mark under the Equal Pay Act, and it was filed by 28 of the national team players in the women's side against the US Soccer Federation. And after it had been dismissed, the spokeswoman for the US women's national team players confirmed that an appeal would be submitted, saying that equal pay means paying women players the same rate for winning a game as men get paid. So, and the argument that women are paid enough if they make close to the same amount as men, while winning more than twice as often, is not equal pay. And so, I think the comparison between the men's national team and the women's national team doesn't really bear comparison, in honesty. So, obviously, the women's team has been hugely successful. They have won 4 World Cups, obviously the most recent of which was last summer. And they've also won 5 Olympic gold medals, whereas the US men's national team didn't qualify for the previous World Cup. And their best before then was in 2002 when they reached the quarterfinals. The best was when they placed 3rd in the very first tournament, which was in 1930. So those don't really compare very well, let's be honest. In the actual ruling, the judge, his name was Gary Klusner, he said that the women's team has been paid more on both a cumulative and an average per game basis than the men's team over the last period. I think what needs to happen with this is there's just more clarity. What constitutes average per game and gate receipts and all of these different things. I believe that the way the women's team and the men's team are actually paid in different ways, in the different collective bargaining agreements with US Soccer. So what happened was that the women's players are compensated largely through guarantees with additional opportunities for sort of bonuses, which are not great. But what happens with the men's players, they are guaranteed less pay, but they can earn lucrative bonuses. So, like, I think the more clarity needs to be given on what all of those things mean in terms of pay. So, obviously, lots of people had their opinion on this, and when the appeal went through, or when the decision was made, Megan Rapinoe, obviously one of the leaders of the women's national team, won the Golden Ball and the Golden Boot in last year's World Cup. She said that they'll never stop fighting for equality, and it was even Joe Biden, who is probably going to be the Democratic nominee this time round, says that and basically threatened the US Soccer Federation by saying to sort out the equal pay now. And he said that, when he's president, if this doesn't get sorted, then they can go elsewhere for World Cup funding, which is a pretty forthright statement. The US Soccer Federation themselves stated that actually what they want to try and do is work with the team, and they said chart a positive path forward to grow the game both here at home and around the world. So there's been a little bit of upheaval when it comes to the US Soccer Federation. They've not exactly been covering themselves in glory with some of the statements that they put forward during all of these court hearings. In fact, the president, Carlos Cordero, he had to resign in March because of some of the submissions that he had made, because he claimed that the job of a male footballer on the national team requires a higher level of skill based on speed and strength than their female counterparts. So, I mean, they are going down swinging with some of these sorts of statements. So it was that, I believe, that led the women's national team to, when they were lining up for their game against Japan in the She Believes Cup, the sort of friendly tournament that I think also involved France and England, that whilst they were waiting for the national anthems to be played, they wore their tops inside out to hide the badge of the US Soccer Federation that they had on their shirts. And what they did leave, pointedly, left the 4 stars that represent the World Cup successes that they have had. So very much kind of, okay, we have actually achieved something, so we need the recognition and the equal pay. And so, yeah, lots of people have come out in support of all of this, including the male players on the US national team. Yeah, that they were very, very adamant in saying that the federation continue to discriminate against the women in the wages and working conditions. So what the judge did allow is that he did recognise that they had not been given the right compensation in terms of travel and accommodation and medical support, and he allowed for that part of their suit to go to trial, and that part is set in June the 16th, and that's going to be in Los Angeles. So, yeah, there's a lot to kind of unpack. I suspect that it's going to have to get sorted out. That I don't know when the appeal is going to be heard. I don't think there's been a date set for that as yet. But If you would like to chime in on that, please, like I said, the best way to do that is via our social media, and we are at GSMC_soccer. And I'd be delighted to hear what you think of all of that. We'll take a quick break there, and we'll come back with how the MLS and US soccer is coping with COVID-19.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Okay, welcome back. In the last section, we talked a little bit about how the US women's national team are trying to appeal the decision made about equal pay over the past few weeks. And in this little section, I just want to chat a little bit about MLS and any kind of possible return to regular play. So the commissioner of MLS, Don Garber, he was interviewed this week, and he said he was cautiously optimistic about a return to play, and he talked a little bit about kind of what that might look like. They, since the middle of March, have not been able to play. Super unfortunate. They had like 1 week's worth of games that they were able to play and had the first round of matches. And the other thing as well was that the league below the MLS, the USL, that had some new members as well. In fact, I'm living in San Diego, and I was fortunate enough to watch the first home game in the USL by the SD Loyal, which is the new pro soccer team in San Diego. It was held up at the Tororo Stadium, USD, the facility up there, and it was a wonderful occasion. There was plenty on the ground. It was called a full house. It was full of people that had been aching to see a professional soccer team in San Diego, and for everyone to have worked so hard to achieve that, and to actually have it and be able to watch it on the field, was really unfortunate that something like this came along to prevent that momentum that had been built up that night wasn't allowed to continue. So I feel very sorry for certainly SD Loyal, who are part owned and managed by the great Landon Donovan. So all the recipe is there for success. It's something that's really going to curtail the progress made by everyone involved at SD Loyal. Anyway, Don Garber, who, like I said, is the Major League Soccer commissioner, he was looking into the idea of what he's starting to call studio games, which are just everybody else is calling them playing games behind closed doors and not having fans around. But he's seeing this as maybe a little bit of an opportunity to have more of a national focus, and having, the people who would normally be calling the games and being at the games in terms of media, be in a studio and commentating from there, and having a focus from all over the place, and not just having 1 or 2 marquee games each weekend. Because he actually does see this as being like a really unique opportunity for the league. It must be extraordinarily tempting to become the first sport to come back we've sort of seen a little bit like of this with Australian rules football, where for a hot second they were the only sport on the planet, and so Fox over here, instead of putting the Australian rules football on their regular channel, which is the Soccer Plus channel, they put it actually on Fox Sports 2. And there was plenty of eyeballs on it, and I was one of those people that was intrigued because I wanted to see some live stuff. But after a week of games, the first week of games in the Australian rules AFL, they called a suspension to that league as well. So it was unfortunate that but I wonder if MLS are looking at this as an opportunity to be the first major sport to come back, where everybody else is still umming and ahhing about what ways to go forward for the resumption of their season. I mean, we've not even had one pitch thrown in Major League Baseball yet, so at least there's been one game played in MLS. Anyway, I think they might just have to be very careful about that, just making sure that the protocols are in place. I know that a lot of the players seem to be living together almost as well, certainly in the sort of lower divisions in the USL, and so that they have been able to train with each other because they are in the same living quarters as each other. But it's definitely not going to happen before June 8, because I think that was the date that was called, at least till that point, that there would not be any games to that point played. So it's going to be an interesting one, really, to see how it all shakes down again. Players have been allowed to resume individual outdoor workouts at team facilities, and that started only in the past week, from May 6th. And several teams actually are beginning to do workouts last Wednesday, and apparently there's going to be more to follow in the coming days. So hopefully it's good news. I suspect that they'll want to get that going as soon as possible, but it'll be interesting to see how the sport, when it clashes with the likes of NFL and the people that are watching on TV and in the stadiums, how that clash works and whether they'll suffer for that. But anyway, we'll soon find out. I want to finish on something a little bit more upbeat. So, it was announced in the last couple of days, on Thursday, May 7th, that one of the great stars of the US women's national team, Alex Morgan, and the longtime MLS player, Servando Carrasco, they had their first little baby, Charlie Eleanor Carrasco, 8 pounds 5 ounces, and so that's a lovely thing to... I know there's been a lot of sort of horrible news or kind of disappointing news, and so it was nice to see that something nice had happened. So I think everyone is doing well. A little highlight of what is otherwise a fairly disappointing and frustrating time when it comes to following soccer. So what I'm going to do now is call an end to this little section of the podcast. If you have any comments about what you think will happen regarding MLS and USL, for that matter, if you have a team that you are following in that league too, I'd love to hear from you. And the best way to do that is at GSMC_soccer on our Twitter and Instagram. And let us know what you think. In part 3, what we're going to do is going to have a little bit of a look at the possible transfers and certainly the rumours that are flying around about now, about players and where they're going to end up, when are they going to end up, and for what, when will the new season start. So we'll take a quick look at that and see what that means for teams and who they themselves might be looking for.
Are you looking for help for your fantasy football team? Check out the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. Get today's best advice on who to start, who to sit, even who you should draft. From sleeper picks to red hot lineups, they got it all covered for you. That's GSMCpodcast.com/fantasy-football-podcast. We'll cover traditional leagues, dynasty, PPR, even IDP leagues. When you need fantasy help, there's just one show to hit up. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Alright, welcome back. In the last section we talked a little bit about the US soccer scene and where all that's headed right now. In this section of the podcast, I want to talk a little bit about transfer rumours. Usually, at this time of year, with seasons coming to an end, we'd be having Champions League finals and UEFA Cup finals right around about now. And there'd be lots of players that would be looking for a move, maybe want to get out of a club that they don't really get a chance at, or wanted to take a step up, Champions League team. So all of these rumours would be circulating around, but this is going to be a very different transfer window, or transfer market indeed. There was a study done, taken by the International Centre for Sports Studies, and they predict a 28% drop in transfer values for all sorts of different players. And because there'll be a period now of probably financial insecurity, they reckon there will be a lot of what we call Bosman players, players that are out of contract, free agents essentially, and there'll be a spike in those types of players as teams aim to clear the books of players that might not necessarily fit into their plans. This study also predicted that $100 million transfer fees won't happen for the next 3 to 4 years. The Neymar transfer, for example, will be an outlier for many years to come, they say. So clubs will also, this study says, look to maybe develop players. Some might not necessarily go for the fully developed plug-and-play player that's going to get you the 20 goals a season. They might look to develop a player and bring him on rather than having to pay massive amounts of money for someone that's the finished article, as it were. There are lots of players who are going to be out of contract. Usually it was around about the end of June would be the end of where contracts would finish. And so notable players, we've got Willian at Chelsea, we've got Dries Mertens at Napoli, Cavani at Paris Saint-Germain, Vertonghen at Tottenham Hotspur, David Silva at City, although I think that he's going to retire. I'm not entirely sure about that. Goetze at Borussia Dortmund, Pedro at Chelsea, and Nathaniel Klein at Liverpool. So all of these are quality players, quality clubs, some of which might not necessarily think they're getting a fair crack at it at where they currently are, and will want to move on. So what's going to happen? And there are some of those players that I've mentioned there have been mentioned in all sorts of transfer rumours. So, for example, we have Tottenham, who are very much in the market to bolster their squad. They are currently got their eye on Thomas Meunier, who plays at Paris Saint-Germain. He's the Belgian right back currently. He's 28 years old. and Ryan Fraser, who they think they can get on a free transfer from Bournemouth for later on this summer. I think it's a very important thing for Tottenham in particular to sign players. The squad has seen a lot of underinvestment right now, and that has seen a decline. They have reached the Champions League final last year, and they have just not really kicked on. In fact, they've probably regressed, if anything, this year. If they are thinking of holding on to Harry Kane for much longer, I think that he's going to insist on more investment in that squad. They rely so heavily on him. And I mentioned there Cavani, and I think he would be a great signing for Tottenham. Even if it was just for Harry Kane to get the odd 20 minutes rest, or a break during an FA Cup game or something along those lines, I think Cavani would do brilliantly for them. And if they can get him on a Bosman, essentially, I think that would be an incredible bit of business, really. I know that he has his critics and he does miss the odd chance, but compared to what Spurs have right now, I don't think it wouldn't even be a punt. It would just, I think, a really interesting signing for them and some backup for Harry Kane. He is flogged to death there. Some other things, Manchester United, I think, are also going to be big players in the future transfer window, whenever that should happen. Ole Gunnar Solskjaer was interviewed recently, and I think he used a fairly unfortunate phrase, which was, they're going to take advantage of what the future transfer market is going to look like, citing that there are going to be a lot of clubs that will be looking to get players off their books, certainly high earners, players that are lower down the leagues that might not be able to pay them their wage that they promised. Maybe it was a lost in translation thing, but to say take advantage of is not really in the spirit of where we're all coming from right now, I think, with coronavirus and all that kind of jazz. So, but I do think that United will look to spend a lot of money. We've got Bruno Fernandes, who's been an absolute revelation for them in the month or so that he's been able to play. And I think they'll only start to add to that, and all of their young players will be a season more experienced. So it wouldn't surprise me that if United really did try and bolster their squad. And in that vein, United are preparing to offer Inter Milan their Argentinian forward Martinez, but there's interest from Barcelona and Paris Saint-Germain also for that player. He's 22 years old. United, along with Chelsea and Tottenham, they're all interested in Lazio's Serbian midfielder Milinkovic-Savic. Chelsea are another team, by the way, that are definitely going to be looking to bolster their squad too, because they have just had their transfer ban lifted. They've not had the opportunity really to sign anyone for a transfer window, so they're another one to keep an eye on. Dani Ceballos, who has been on loan at Arsenal, he's been subject to some rumour linking him with Sevilla, but he replied to that nonsense with a Donald Trump gif, so I assume that was a fake news gif. He's on loan actually from Real Madrid, but he's only 23 years old, and he's looked decent when he's come on. He's got a couple of free kicks and what have you, so he's looked alright. Tottenham and Arsenal, they're also in the market for one of the players I mentioned earlier, Willian. He's 31, but I feel like one of those players that's super underrated, that he always comes on, tries hard, does a job. It's looking more and more likely that he will leave Chelsea whenever his contract comes to an end. No one knows when that might be. Borussia Dortmund, they're in the market for another teenager. From Chelsea, his name is Charlie Webster. He's a midfielder. He's only 16 years old. But if I was a 16-year-old footballer, I'm a long way. It's a long time since, that I was 16 years old, by the way. I would go to Borussia Dortmund because they do such a good job with all of their youngsters. They give them a chance. Jadon Sancho, I think, amongst them. Absolute highlights of that program there. They do such a good job with all of their youngsters. I think the important thing there is they trust their youngsters to do a good job for them. So, Haaland has just come in and he's been banging goals in right, left and centre. Can't stop himself. He's only young. He's in the Borussia Dortmund team and ripping up trees. Absolutely brilliant. So, keep an eye out for that. One of the players again I mentioned, Dries Mertens. He's on Frank Lampard's list. Apparently, again, these are how these rumours start, that he added him on Instagram, and has also contacted him. So Dries Mertens, who's 33 years old, he's playing his football in Napoli right now. But, again, I think that Chelsea need a little bit of experience up front. They have Tammy Abraham right now. Giroud is obviously very experienced, but I don't think Frank Lampard fancies him all that much up there. Looks like they might be in the market for Dries Mertens. And finally, in our little roundup of transfer speculation, Arsenal and Tottenham are both keen on Gerson, who is a 22-year-old midfielder. He plays in Flamengo. They were in the Club World Championships just recently, and so maybe he caught the eye there. So there you go. Plenty to be thinking about in terms of transfer windows, and I want to hear from you about your club and who you feel like they need to buy, what positions do they need to strengthen. We are at GSMC_soccer on Twitter and Instagram, and yeah, let us know who you think your team are eyeing up. Alright, in the final part of the show, we start, hopefully, a running theme going through the podcast. I'm calling it Around the World in 80 Soccer Moments, and yeah, the significant happenings in the sport that we love. You're listening to the GSMC Soccer Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines. They got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Alright, welcome back to the GSMC Soccer Podcast. In the last section we looked at the possible transfers and who clubs might be going after should the transfer market open up again. In this last section of the show, I'm going to get into what I'm calling the Around the World in 80 Soccer Moments. So I'll look at the really sort of significant things that have happened in the sport to shape the game that we all love. And what I'm going to start off with is one of the absolutely pivotal moments in US soccer. And that is, and I'm being a little bit flippant here, but the Diana Ross misses a penalty on Soldier Field. And if you don't know, that was part of the opening ceremony of the 1994 World Cup finals. She was singing. The organisers of the ceremony thought it would be a great idea if Diana Ross was to kick a ball, an absolutely giant football as well it was, into a goal. And the idea was that she would tap it in there. And unfortunately she missed. But the goals collapsed anyway under the weight of that shot. But what I'm getting at is that it was the opening of something that the US Soccer Federation had been working towards for such a long time. And they had only qualified once since 1950 for a World Cup tournament, and that was the last one in 1990. And so what they worked on doing was hosting the World Cup finals, and they did that in 1994. Now, it didn't just inspire players that would go on to play in the national team, but it's the event that transformed how soccer is organised in the US. It also changed an attitude, I think, of people around the world, that people from the US really enjoy their soccer and are passionate about it, they're good at it, and they speak well about it. And all of these things were achieved by the US hosting the 1994 World Cup finals. It's actually a pretty miserable World Cup for your host here, because England didn't actually qualify for this World Cup. So yeah, it was a real shame that England weren't there, but an absolutely massive thing for US soccer. And yeah, because from all of this, one of the promises that had to be made to FIFA was that the US Soccer Federation would organise a league. They'd tried in the past. They'd had the North America Football League, and they'd had Pele and Bobby Moore and George Best and all of these great players playing in a league in the US, but it just didn't kick on at all. So what ended up happening was Major League Soccer was developed and has been going ever since. And it's absolutely imperative to how the national team has done since, that people can make a living out of playing soccer, and then from there maybe go on and play for the national team or go and play into Europe. So people like Clint Dempsey were inspired by that. Landon Donovan, who played in Germany and England before coming back and playing for the Galaxy to such a great extent. So it was really important that that day, when Diana Ross did miss that penalty, in fairness, it was close, but it was such an important moment for US soccer. And I'm absolutely certain that I would not be speaking to you right now if it wasn't for the fact that they hosted the 1994 World Cup finals. The next little moment is a very significant one on our 80 soccer moments. Is the Football Association in England is formed on October 26th, 1863. Up until that point, there'd been all sorts of different rules being played, so that when visiting teams happened, they would have to, first of all, sort out whose rules they were going to be playing under. So the main ones were the Cambridge rules and the Sheffield rules. So I don't know what your geography of England is like, but that's like the Southerners versus the Northerners. And so instead of having to clarify all of the different rules, the idea was to draw up some rules to make sure that there's uniformity, so everyone is playing under the same the same principles, as it were. So what had happened was, at a pub called the Freemasons Tavern, 11 clubs from all around London came together to establish a single set of rules for the upcoming matches that they were all going to be playing in. So what happened was that they sort of created a sort of a formal version of the sort of game that we understand as football now. There's certain rules that were different, but there was a standardization of things. So each school played under, or each organisation, they had this solid set of rules. Now, they didn't get sorted in the one meeting at the Freemasons Tavern. There were actually 6 meetings. So that sounds like a bit of an excuse. I don't know. It's like, oh, yeah, well, are we going to have to come back next week to do this again? Oh, yeah. Same time? Yeah? Okay, lovely. So, but yeah, there was actually 6 different meetings. The official rules were drawn up during this time over a period of 3 months. So, but not everyone was happy about this, by the way. So, there was a team called Blackheath who, instead of joining this new football association, he decided that he was going to join another organisation, the Rugby Football Union, because the way that he wanted to play this team wanted to play their games involved being able to handle the ball in open play, and so he decided that he would help standardise the rules of rugby football. It's actually where we get the term soccer from. It's actually an English word, even though people tend to think that it's an Americanization of the great game of football. It's actually from association rules. So the soccer is a contraction of association, and so it didn't need all of those sort of new names. All right, so I think that should do us. If you have any significant moments that you would like for me to cover in the next coming weeks and months, I'd be delighted to hear from you. The best way to get in touch is at GSMC_soccer. And if you have any suggestions, and that goes for anything that you have heard on this podcast today, I would be delighted to hear, because at the moment, there's not a great deal going on in terms of live football, and so I would love to hear your stories of how you became a fan of the game in the first place, the teams that you support. Some interaction in these times of self-isolation is a good thing. So I would love to hear from you. And with that, thank you again for spending this time with the GSMC Soccer Podcast, which is brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'll be back on Thursday with a preview of some actual football. With the Bundesliga starting up, I get to actually see what might happen in the future, which is a very heartening thing. Again, if you're interested in German football, please let me know how you think things are going to shake down there. Please give us a follow on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. Like I said, it's at GSMC_soccer. That would be greatly appreciated. And if you can, give us a follow on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. Like I said, that's at GSMC_soccer. And that would be greatly appreciated. If you are able to, please leave a review about the podcast as well. That allows other people to be able to see it, and we get to learn a bit about what you want to hear as well. Thank you, dear listener, and we'll do this again on Thursday. Until that time, please stay safe and look after each other.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.